How are you?
Not too bad. So, well, firstly, thank you for inviting me. I am Marc Gayle, financial analyst and a contributor to Finance Twitter JA, hashtag Finance Twitter JA, the best finance community on Twitter in Jamaica, right? And then Sanya Goffe is the president of the PIAJ. I was invited to host a Twitter live chat or, a discussion about pensions, by the PIAJ. So, I mean, I guess my first question to you, Sanya, you can introduce yourself and just give us a broad overview of, your experience and so.
Sure. So as you said, I'm president of the PIAJ. The PIAJ is a lobby group that's set up over 15 years ago when the Pensions Act first came into force, really to be a driving force for regulatory change in Jamaica and advancing the statutory framework for pensions, and also to advance financial literacy amongst Jamaicans. So we've been doing a lot of work over the years, and I became president maybe 2.5 years ago, but I've been serving on the board for many, many years, from its inception, in fact. And so that's what PIJ has been doing. And pension reform and retirement security is something that I'm very passionate about. And I do see myself and the PIAJ really, contributing to nation building through retirement security, or advancing retirement security improvements.
All right. So, I mean, so that raises a ton of questions. So I guess the first question, Sanya, is, so when you say retirement security, what does that mean? Like, so in a practical sense, right? Like me as a normal worker or an entrepreneur or whatever, can I explain to me, like, what are the risks when it comes to retirement, and how does a pension kind of help me mitigate those risks?
So simply, without the jargon, retirement security means you're in a position when you've finished working to look after yourself. That's really what it means. Being able to live, and this is my little catchphrase now, an independent, dignified life in retirement. And a lot of times, many of us know family members or neighbors or friends who lived really good lives when they were working. I mean, they were able to afford things, they traveled, they lived well, and somehow they didn't make proper provision for when they stopped working. And they are experiencing what you call old age poverty or pensioner poverty. And so, and what you find is that creates a slew of run-on problems. So if you have a situation where you've worked all your life and you didn't make adequate provision for retirement, and now you have nothing to lean on, you depend on, let's say, your children. And we know culturally in Jamaica, we have a concept or a mindset of my pick me, I'm a pension, right? I don't need to look after, I look after my children and they in turn will look after me. But when you put that pressure, that intergenerational pressure, where you expect your children to look after you, you undermine their ability to save for retirement themselves, to look after themselves, even while they're working. And then, of course, that creates a pressure also on the public purse, because, I mean, the government's not going to have our elderly just living on the streets, right? So we need to ensure that they're taken care of. So if they can't take care of themselves, the state is going to take care of them. And Andrew Holness is not going into his bank account to look after our pensioners. That's coming through the taxes, right? So working people are going to be taxed more. So even if you look after yourself and your children are able to live an independent life, just on a nationwide, in terms of the working force, you're going to feel this pressure if, as a country, we don't have more of our elderly population being able to be independent financially. So when we talk about retirement security, that's what we're talking about. Being able to know when you're 60 or you're 65 that you have a stream of income derived from savings when you were working that can take you through to death.
So it's basically, I mean, it's kind of like, how do I phrase this? So yeah, there are a number of things that came to mind a while ago when you were talking, right? So that just the idea about your picnic being your retirement, I mean, that's, yeah, like there's a lot to unpack there, right? So like Jamaica, for example, for many, many years, primarily agricultural based, economy. And so obviously, the more kids that you have is the more, farm hands you have in, at your disposal, and the more farm hands is the more money you can make, and therefore the more support you can have, right? So, I mean, if you just think about that just from that perspective, right, that explains a lot of, the family dynamic and, just even the structure of our economy, right? And so the notion of kind of taking away the scare of, when you retire, you don't necessarily have to rely on, a whole bunch of kids or even your kids to take care of you. literally can change the family dynamic and even your family planning decisions, like when you are young, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love that.
I know, and you really are touching on a really important point, breaking that cycle of intergenerational dependence and the intergenerational poverty, because it's real. It has to stop at some point where you put yourself in a position to have retirement security, and by virtue of doing that, you put your children in a better position. And the truth is that it even becomes more nuanced, because even gender differences, women tend to take on the caregiving of the elderly and the elderly parents more so than men. That's just how it is. And so you find that women also are in a particularly vulnerable group, because they break their pensionable service. When I say pensionable service, meaning the years where they can save for a pension, for looking after children, looking after elderly parents. They often take on the brunt of that financial responsibility. They tend to earn less than men. They retire earlier than men, yet they experience ill health factors and occurrences earlier than men. So you find that even women, it's not just a kind of blanket, let's just all say for retirement. Even women need to take this particularly seriously, because we have, nuanced setbacks in our own kind of ecosystem that impact us and set us back when we enter into retirement. And so you're right, it's a changing of a cultural mindset and putting people in a place where they recognize the importance of it. But then that feeds into another very big point. And one of the questions I want to kind of just anticipate, which is, how can we get people to do this, right? How can we get people to take this seriously? And the truth is, Mark, these programs are great, and it will impact a certain sector of the population. But the reality is that financial literacy does not move the needle when it comes to coverage and retirement saving. So right now we have only about 10% of the working population saving in the formal sector, private sector, saving for retirement. When you add public sector workers, that bounces up to like 16, 17%.
Wow.
Let's say you even round that up to 20%.
Right.
That's very, very low. And we're talking about having had a private sector pension framework, regulatory framework for almost 16 years. And of course, this is the regulatory framework. But even before then, you had pension plans. So coverage is very, very low. People are not running to sign up for Scotia Bridge and NCD Smart. They're not banging on the door trying to get into a retirement scheme, because nobody really sees that as a priority. So what can we do to, as a country, to put in place an environment that encourages people or gets people in the retirement savings net? And one of the things that has worked quite successfully in a lot of jurisdictions and many states in the US is what you call auto-enrollment. Simply put, if you join your employer, you start working for a company, and that company does not have a pension plan, you must be automatically enrolled in a retirement scheme, like a Scotia, like a NCB, like a Proven. And if you move from job to job, you have, basically your account follows you everywhere you go. So you leave from Grace Kennedy and you go to Water Commission, and then you go to, Honeybun. It doesn't matter. You get automatically enrolled and you're back in the same account and you save. The beauty of auto enrollment, though, is that you can opt out. So you're not imposing unilaterally this obligation on everybody to save 5% or 3%. You're saying, listen, you're going to be automatically enrolled, but you can opt out. But what studies have shown is that most people don't opt out. The opt-out rates tend to be very low. So it's banking on a human inertia, where people generally just kind of like, okay, you're taking 5% from my pay. I'll get around to opting out. So you find opt-out rates maybe between 10 to 15, 20%. And so it actually can move the coverage from what is now 10% to, optimistically maybe 50, 60, 70, even 70%, right? Because people don't opt in. Nobody's going to an NCB to opt in. So how can we kind of turn it around and opt out? So the PIAJ is actually working with, I think Simon Johnson and Wendy Ivy, right? So they're on the research project. So we're collaborating to put a concept paper to the Minister of Finance to open this up and to look at ways in which, the viability of it, getting people to, getting the country to kind of put in place an auto-enrollment program. By
the way, so Simon Johnson, big up Guru in Training on Twitter. All right. All right. So there are a few things that you mentioned there that kind of struck me. One is, just the idea of auto enrollment, right? Like that's very, very powerful. And so there's another problem that solution has solved, which is, in some countries they were looking at donor organs, right? And the question came up now: how do we encourage people to enroll voluntarily, or when you get your driver's license or something, they auto enroll you, and the enrollment figures spiked. Obviously, once you go to auto enrollment, it automatically spikes. So there is precedent for the fact that it's very, very effective, even outside of thinking about pensions and thinking about retirement schemes and whatever. Just that structure, that mechanism is very, very powerful. So I really do like that. I guess so. But in terms of Jamaica now, so you're saying that you guys are working with Simon and somebody else to I guess work on to do some research into how it may be implemented in Jamaica.
Yes, so we're looking at it. We're looking at whether or not we can really make a case to the minister for the effectiveness of it. I'm very positive and optimistic, but so Simon and his team and Wendell, they're handling the kind of econ data analysis, and then myself and Marie James, who is also director of the PIAJ, we're working on more of the narrative of it, really the concept itself. So we're building out a concept paper, and then I actually had a quick call with the minister. One, because I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't be wasting my time, and because the government could have well been looking at it already, who knows. And Nigel is really, he's always open and he's always receptive to hearing new ideas and proposals, and he was as receptive as I expected him to be. One of the things though that will be key is how we actually socialize the issue, and so it will be important for people to get buy-in. And I don't think the buy-in is going to be difficult, honestly, Mark, because like I said, you can opt out. You don't like it, you can opt out. Not a convenient time, you can opt out. And there are lots of design features around it. So like some countries, they have auto re-enrollment. So you opt out today, but that opting out has an expiration date. 2 years pass, you're automatically re-enrolled. But so that, because for some people, they're not having a problem with saving for retirement. It's just right now it's a problem. Right. They can't manage. So if you auto re-enroll them like 2 years later, there's a likelihood they will not come out again. The persistent chronic opt-outers, it's very low, right? Another design feature that's been very effective in some countries is auto escalation. So every 2 years, your contribution rate goes from 5% to 5.5 to 6 to 6, and so that also ensures that people are making adequate and sufficient contributions, because we tend to get caught up on the 10% coverage in Jamaica without really questioning, of the 10%, how much of those persons really are going to have an adequate pension in retirement. So the sufficiency of the pension when you get to retirement is also important.
You're back now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess another question that I had a while ago was, or another idea, I don't know if you guys are thinking about this now, is also just the notion of, I guess company matching, right? So it's, I mean, so it's a multi-sided dice, right? So, obviously you want to create incentives for people. Like, why would people, want to enroll? Well, obviously, if I can get free money from my company, tax-free, like pre-tax, contributed to my retirement, I mean, that's a very, very powerful incentive, right? And then on the company side, if it can be, a tax deductible expense and, whatever, then, that's a pretty powerful incentive as well. So,
no, Mark, excellent. That's proven, I mean, statistically to be a big incentive. So you make a very good point, to the extent that employers can see that, offering to match or even match up to a point will encourage retirement savings, definitely. As you said, it's free money.
Right, exactly. And then there are ways employers can figure it out. They can include it in a compensation package and, whatever, So I think it could be, so I think that's a great strategy. All right. So we've spoken about, I guess, at the high level, why it's needed, right? I'm just thinking about the potential, implication about Jamaica's future. And I have this theory that Jamaica is, she has entered what I call her golden window, which is kind of like a unique point in time, because over the last three administrations, since 2008, 2009, significant work has been done on the economic front. We've brought our debt to GDP ratio down from 150%, to, 90-something% before the crisis. And, a lot of structural changes have been made. So going forward, we have a very, very, very solid foundation to build on, right? So that makes me extremely optimistic about Jamaica, because never before in our history have we seen that sort of policy continuity across political administrations and across multiple administrations, right? So, but one of the things about when you look at pensions around the world, and the impact it has on the economy, right? So like one of the major, I guess pillars or functions of pension is just recycling savings into investment to spur economic growth, to do things like incentivize innovation, invest in new asset classes. I know we're getting a little technical, but, invest in like venture capital, invest in private equity, invest in, other forms of financial assets. And then those then go on to invest in entrepreneurs, invest in risky technology that can change the world, but most of them may tush, right? And then also just providing developing, deepening capital markets, so making more attractive to different types of companies to formalize operations and eventually raise money and then eventually go public, and then you create wealth for a whole bunch of all the employees, directors, shareholders, and so on, right? So so thinking about it from so that's kind of like another aspect of it too. But we spoke about the workers and the workers auto-enrolling, but what about me as an entrepreneur, right? Like if I want to, or self-employed person, if I am self-employed one person, is there going to be some sort of plan for me also to be able to enroll, both myself and, either the company, which has an employee of one, or just, me as a self-employed person? And how would that kind of like look?
Right. So the solution, so I love your little summary earlier in terms of just how the kind of knock-on effect and just how influential and how impactful pension funds and pension fund investments can be in terms of national development. And I think we can circle back to that, because it touches on the investment regulatory parameters that we have and the restrictions that pension fund managers and trustees have to deal with. But in terms of like gig workers, informal sector workers, contract workers, you have standalone retirement schemes. So there is a facility for you to put in place something for retirement. I mean, it's there, right? So any of your retirement scheme providers, like I said, Proven Rock.
It's there right now. Like I could go and register for one right now.
Right now, you could go knock on NPD's door and sign up for a retirement scheme. So you may if you watch US like commercials, you talk about your IRA.
Right.
They call the individual
401k.
Right. So 401ks are states employer-sponsored arrangements, similar to the Grace Kennedy pension plan. IRAs are like our approved retirement schemes, like our Scotia Bridge, NCB Smart, Proven Rock, right? And that's specifically set up on the legislation for informal, sole practitioners, like you said, entrepreneurs, gig workers, persons who work with an employer but are not eligible for the pension plan. Because remember, every pension plan has eligibility criteria.
Right.
So you could work with a company, but for some reason, your age, the type of job you're working, you're not eligible for the company's pension plan. So you could also participate in a retirement scheme.
So can we dig into that a little bit? What are some of the eligibility criteria that, like I would need to think about as a worker, to know whether or not I qualify? Even, I mean, don't have to be every single one, but just at a high level, is it like income-based?
Right, no, so it's a plan-by-plan thing. So as in it's plan specific, right? So it's not like a regulatory eligibility requirements. So let's say, for example, company A may say this pension plan is only for persons in our administrative office. We don't have a plan for our maintenance workers, or we could say we have a plan for maintenance workers or administrative workers, but people in the executive office, we don't have a pension plan for them. So you have some companies where not everybody gets enrolled in the pension plan. Now, it's very few in number. The majority of pension plans in Jamaica are set up by employers. All employees, once you're permanent, over 18 and not yet 65 or 60, depending, you're able to participate. But because there are those plans that shut out some employees, those employees are still able to participate in our savings arrangement through retirement schemes. Like I said, these standalone retirement schemes. and you're able to contribute up to 20% of your income, whether you're in a employer-sponsored pension arrangement or whether you're a self-employed person, you contribute up to 20% of your income. And so, I mean, and like you said, it's a tax advantage system, right? You get to contribute before your income is taxed. And I don't want to say tax-free, because when you say tax-free, it suggests that the whole thing is tax-free. It's tax advantage, meaning it's tax deferred. When you get to the what we call in pensions the decumulation stage, the stage where you start to draw down the pension, then it's a taxable event. But at the end of the day, you actually earn more than you would have if you were investing your money after you've paid tax, after it gets to your bank account. So so there are opportunities for everybody to save, but people aren't doing it. But so which is why the auto enrollment is going to impact the persons in the formal sector, the private, employed to in the private sector. But yes, you're right. There is that gig economy, self-employed section that we need to find a way to encourage them to take the initiative to save, because auto enrollment kind of takes the initiative from you. But for the self-employed, we need to find ways to encourage them. So sections like these would be part of it. But also there is a target market or target kind of program for persons who are informal and low income. So that's what we call micro pensions, finding ways out. And micro pensions has had a lot of success in countries like India, Rwanda, Kenya, many countries in Latin America, where people can't save 20% of their income every month. That's just crazy. They're trying to live, so you can't talk to them credibly about doing that. But you can say to them, what about if you save a little bit at a time, almost like the partner concept we have in Jamaica, where you kind of throw a partner, but formalizing that. So imagine a taxi driver who pulls up to a gas station and his the gas comes up to $2,800, and he's prompted to pay, round it up to 3,000, and 200 goes to his micro pension.
I love that. Yeah.
So you go to the supermarket or you go to the corner shop, or but it requires a certain type of plumbing, as you can imagine, technological plumbing, but allowing you to kind of top up. And these little prompts, you get a prompt on your phone. Do you want press yes to put $100 from your phone credit to your micro pensions account? You don't have to think about it much. It's only $100 and I still have credit left, and you just press yes and you keep moving. And if you get enough of those prompts over a sustained period of time, the thinking is that you would have at least started to put yourself in a position where you have something for retirement.
So I love that, Sanya. I mean, I think that approach, obviously is kind of like, I guess the panacea, right? But I guess the question there is just, how do we get there? Because that feels like, it's like that feels like it's so far away, given our Jamaican context, you know what I mean?
So good question. That one is big. Micro pensions, it's easy to articulate what it is, but the implementation is huge, and it's going to need government buy-in. I'm happy to say that I know that the government has engaged a consultant to look at micro pensions and determine the feasibility and the viability of it. And so that's starting. Of course, there's a lot of kind of underground work, to determine whether or not it's going to make sense for us. But it has worked in a lot of countries with a similar demographic in terms of a large, low-income, informal, sector base. And so the expectation is that there may be space for micro pensions. And my thing, Mark, is that there's no one-size-fits-all, right? And I think that's what you're alluding to. So we may need to do auto enrollment for one sector. We may need to do micro pensions for another sector. We're going to have to re-look at the NIS system for another sector as well. And in fact, it was in the newspaper. I mean, I can speak to it. The minister had set up a commission to look at kind of revamping and making recommendations for improving the investment framework for NIS. And I sat on that commission. We put the recommendations to the minister, and hopefully we'll start to see some change where that is. So it's a lot of little, and then you'll recall the minister mentioned earlier this year, I think, in his budget presentation, social pensions. And that's like the cash transfers that you've seen in COVID, for example. Where people don't talk to me about saving for retirement. Don't talk to me about no 20%. Don't talk to me about before income tax. Like, hello, I am not at all in that sector. So those persons benefit from social pensions, from basically support, cash support from the government. So it's a multifaceted approach, but I think if we definitely have the commitment and we properly socialize the issues, we'll get the buy-in that we need.
Yeah, yeah, and I think generally speaking, you know, if people respond to incentives, right, and you know that's what economists study, and I mean, I love looking at incentives, like, because you know incentives explain human behavior, generally speaking, you know what I mean, and you can see it, you know, in taxi drivers and whatever. Like if I mean, I'm going to take this to its most extreme, but if, for example, you know, every time somebody, like a taxi man bad drove, you know, somebody else, he was executed, I guarantee you there's nobody.
Exactly.
All taxi drivers will be very disciplined, you know what I mean? So it's just an incentive system. So in this particular instance, yeah, it's just a matter of like figuring out, you know, all the different incentives, and you can figure out a way that, you know, okay, everybody, whether it is a micro pension or the social pension, whatever, like when there's some sort of contribution, you know, from the worker and the entrepreneur, whatever, there is free money, you know, a free money component of it, then yeah, I think that could be very, very powerful. All right, so I feel like we've covered a lot of ground on that side, right? Now, me being the finance Twitter JA person and whatever, like it would be remiss of me to not dive into the investment side, right? Because that like excites me a lot, right? Because I mean, you know, so I guess the first place I would want to start is, what are the you said that there were some recent changes to investment regulations when it comes to pensions generally. So I guess, can you give me a quick kind of synopsis of where we were before, and then what the changes were, and you know where we're going?
Okay, sure. So the investment regulations were particularly restrictive, right? So you had restrictions on, so first of all, you were limited to basically the investment classes set out in the legislation, which up to last year did not include private equity or venture capital or anything. If you were, for example, investing in equity, it would have to be listed equity, it would have to be shares. Would have to be listed ordinary shares, sorry. Preference shares had a special carve out, but outside of preference shares, if you're talking about equity, it would have to be listed. And that proved to be a major a kind of, you know, restriction for investment managers. And then we have what you call, there are limits around certain types of assets had restrictions, as in no more than a certain percentage could be invested in non-income generating real estate, in foreign currency denominated assets. Even foreign currency denominated assets are still restricted to sovereign debt of US, UK, and Canada. So I couldn't go and buy, a pension fund can't buy like shares in a company in Barbados, even if it's listed, or shares in a, you know, you couldn't do that. So even so, foreign exchange was limited to 5%. Recently just moved to 7.5% to be bounced up to 10% by March, or I think April next year. But before that, we were constrained to 5%. And there were some nuances in the legislation, because you had 5% by BOJ, and then the investment reg said 20%, and there was all this conflict, which the BOJ sorted out, but it created.
Right. So the governor just announced that those changes the other day. So that it was, I guess, the normalization of that discrepancy between the FSC and the BOJ, right?
Right. So the the regularizing or reconciling the ambiguity happened last year, September. But what I will say is that there was much noise was made about the ambiguity, but the truth is, if you understand how legislation works, the BOJ's position under the Banking Act was actually what superseded the investment regulations, and the BOJ made that very clear, and the FSC made that very clear. There were some people who did not want to hear that and wanted to hold on to the 20%, but the truth is that it has always been 5%. So that's been moved to 7.5%, and it's supposed to be 10% shortly. So that's a limit around a particular asset class. Last year, like I said,
can you stick up in on that real quick? So what is going to be the real impact, you know, within investment circles or within markets, for example, of, you know, that, because I guess, you know, in effect, what that means is that there are going to be some investment houses or some pension funds or some, you know, investment managers that have 20% of their assets in foreign currency denominated assets. So now they have to unwind 13.5% to get down to 7.5%.
Yeah, they will. So the governor has been very sensitive to the impact that can have on the market, and so there is all pension funds that are over the 7.5 must determine a transition plan to come down to 10, because there's nobody's forcing you to come to 7.5 now, but in 3 months you're going to be allowed to go up to 10. So essentially, the transition plan is to get you down to 10. And I will say the FSC and the BOJ, they've been very open-minded around it. They understand that you can't be having fire sales of assets, etc., and that is really detrimental, especially now. And so any transition plan that's put to the regulator is expected to be sensitive on the side of the investment managers. That it's important to be compliant, but at the same time, you have to recognize the macroeconomic, factors that are at play.
Right.
So yes, there has to be a regularizing. Everybody needs to be on the same playing field by March, March. I think it's April 1st. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So sorry, I just did that for my community, because that's one of those things where there may be some opportunities there. So we can all kind of, as an investor, look out for some of those potential.
But what I will say, Mark, is that the PIAJ is lobbying very aggressively to have the governor look at the category of assets. Because yes, you are moved to 10%, but the restriction is still on, as I said, sovereign debt of the US, UK, Canada, and Jamaica. So it's still very limited. And Governor Biles has said that his team is looking at widening the pool of investable assets right now. So you couldn't just pick up pension money and go and invest in a company in Singapore. Like, you just couldn't do that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right, cool. So that's on the reduction, 20%.
Right. So just to talk about the limits a little bit more. So there's no been an allowance for private equity, which you probably know already. That's 5%. But shockingly, and I will use the word shockingly, all the discussions have always been around 5% private equity as distinct from 5% private debt. But when the regulations came in force, Can you repeat that? You broke up a little bit. Okay, hold on. And yeah, you're breaking up too. Okay, I think we're back on.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was just saying that
right. Yeah. So you were talking about the private.
Right. So talking about private equity and private debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you're allowed to invest 5% in private equity, but that's combined with private debt. And then another limitation, Mark, around private equity is that it has to be in a Jamaican company. It can't be an overseas company that's registered to do business here. It's only registered, incorporated in Jamaica.
So even if you have a Jamaican company that's registered in Barbados or St. Lucia or whatever, that's off the table?
No, so if it's not incorporated down at the company's office, you can't.
Wow.
Which is a distinction, because there are other provisions that allow companies incorporated in other countries registered to do business here that we can invest in some of their particular instruments. And so it was really surprising, because nobody expected those restrictions. So we're trying to work now to push even more to disaggregate private equity and private debts, and move from 5% up to 10%. And in fact, that's part of the recommendation that was a part of the economic task force that the minister had put in place. So we're hoping to see some movement where that is concerned.
Okay. All right. So because this is all embedded in legislation, or is it a regulation?
The legislation, yes.
Okay, interesting. So if you had your wishes granted, right? Like a genie came in and said, "All right, Sanya, you have one wish when it comes to what would be the allocation for you? How much percent, to private equity, and how much to private debt?"
Yeah, well, I think the as an industry association, we're comfortable with 10 to 15% for private equity.
Okay.
But also, I think for me, my wish list would be opening up outside of Jamaican companies, provided they're registered to do business here. Right. And if you're talking about wish lists, I'd want foreign currency limitations to be to be removed. I would like instruments from jurisdictions other than the US, UK, and Canada. And also, I honestly feel, Mark, especially you talked about pension funds playing a role in nation building. I think making an allowance, a special carve out for infrastructure investing, roads, water, hospitals, sanitation. And if a company has as its purpose the building of roads, the building of hospitals, whatever it may be, investing in those companies are in a special category.
Right.
Not caught up in private equity, not caught up in the public, you know, you don't have to be publicly listed. It's a special carve out, recognizing that there is a particular role that those types of investments play in nation building. And it's not new. I mean, around the world globally, pension funds contribute significantly to infrastructure development.
Right.
And we have a lot of private equity funds coming up now with infrastructure as a big part of their mandate. And I think that recognizing the importance, and of course, this is not to jettison due diligence. So
Right.
you're doing your normal diligence and prudence, etc. Our investment managers are very good. They're very prudent. They're not reckless investment managers who, you know, kind of throwing pension money at anything. So I'm fairly confident that they can handle that type of kind of, you know, a carve out as an asset class.
Okay, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, the one thing that came to mind about that, you know, obviously, so I agree with you in terms of the carve out, in terms of infrastructure and, you know, other nation building stuff, because, you know, yeah, that particular asset subclass, as it were, is particularly unique. And, you know, it does require pension assets, long-term money, you know, not typical retail investors, you know, generally speaking, right? Because it's a complete different way of thinking. The one thing that I could say, the one risk there is obviously, you know, if there are, you know, no limits or the limits are too high, then all of a sudden you have a pension portfolio that has a significant amount of illiquid assets that are not necessarily, you know, income generating. You know, then it creates like some complications on the redemption side, you know what I mean? So I guess, I mean, all this stuff is very complicated, and, you know, so like, I mean, I'm happy that, you know, there are competent people, you know, dealing with this and like, so, you know, so kind of like untangling all these knotty issues, because they do, you know, I mean, Farmer Joe or whatever that, you know, has his pension plan, him do business, you know, if you have invested 30% of your portfolio and a whole heap of liquid assets, all he wants to know is that when he retires, he gets his cash, right? So,
and that's the role the investment managers play, right? So they're the ones that they look at the demographic of a pension plan. They understand who's retiring when, how they're, you know, the actuary does projections as to how long Marc Gayle is likely to live. There are all these kind of mortality tables. So I mean, the computations are done, and then the investment manager is able to advise the trustees and say, well, given your demographic and your profile of your pension plan, we think we can put this percentage in something, you know, with a time horizon of 40 years and this in a time horizon of 1, you know, based on what we have to invest and when we need the return. So you're right. You make a very good point. It's not kind of like, oh, we need some roads, get some pension money and invest.
Right.
There are a lot of, you know, nuanced factors that you have to take into consideration.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, so in terms of where we are today, right, in terms of the limits and whatever, I mean, in the last, I want to say like 3 years or so, we've seen, I mean, it's a small explosion. I'm just going to use the word explosion, even though it's not a real explosion, but we've seen a significant amount of activity in the private asset class generally, right? Private debt, you have Cygnus, you know, and you have, you know, other firms that are doing, you know, different stuff. And in private equity, we're seeing a lot more. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, on your recent appointment, right? That's a very, very good look. I love to see, you know, these type of things. You know, so we're seeing a lot more activity. I mean, Proven has been doing a lot of stuff, you know, for many, many years. You know, and some of the other investment banks have been doing things, you know, kind of like in an ad hoc way. But over the next, I want to say like 5 years, you know, based on the momentum, we're going to see a lot more of this. But given the limits that currently exist in the system, what would you say, in terms of where we are now, how do you think we are on a percentage base? Like, are we almost like completely maxed what the legal limits are according to the regulations existing now?
Yeah, based on my work as a practitioner, because I practice in the area of pensions law, so I, you know, have a bit of intimate knowledge of where plans are.
Right.
Almost, I think all plans, many are already maxed out on private equity limit.
Really?
Yeah. Many of them are. So, yeah.
No,
so I'm not saying all. I can't, you know, I don't advise all. And you know, the investment managers would kind of be more on the ground. What's very useful, Marc, is for those of your listeners who want kind of more granular detail, the FSC it's usually 2 quarters late, 2 quarters behind, I should say. They publish their kind of statistics for the industry. So to the extent that they have a sense of where the assets are allocated, you'll see that, but it's all on a kind of global level, not on a plan by plan. But yeah, many are already there, and so they have to kind of be maneuvering to see, you know, if a new opportunity comes along, which is why moving from the 5% is something, and that's really key. If you saw the minister's overall kind of proposal coming out of the economic task force, the recommendations did include moving 5% from 5% to 10%. And disaggregating. So he accepted that subcommittee's proposal. So Michael Leachin had chaired a subcommittee looking at a number of issues. I sat on it along with Simon and Wendell. And part of the recommendations, amongst many others, was that disaggregation and moving 5% to 10. And that made it into the ultimate recommendation. So we're really hoping to see that movement.
Right.
Yeah.
So in theory, the effective impact of that small little change, the disaggregation, and then the increase from 5% to 10%, that could almost double, or maybe like almost triple, 2.5 times the potential liquidity provided to private equity, generally speaking.
Yes, that would be that estimate is reasonable. The truth though, and I think as well, and I'm glad that you mentioned many of the private equity funds that are around, because there's a lot of negative reaction to private equity investing. A kind of, you know, it's not safe, and it's too risky, and because you're dealing with pension plan money, where the investment parameters and conditions are quite different than if you were investing just an ordinary customer who comes into a bank or a financial institution. But the truth is, a lot of the private equity investing is done through the funds that you're referring to.
Right.
That's you're not really seeing a pension fund taking up money and putting it in John Brown Limited that just got incorporated last year. That's not happening.
Right.
It's the private equity funds that are able to know, you know, aggregate the investment, and then they can tap into markets that pension funds can't directly get access to. So if you look at like Portland, Portland is doing work in Latin America. You have CMF. I mean, many of them have a different kind of focus or profile. And so pension funds are able to, through these equity, these funds, access these markets. And what's good is that all of these funds have strong investment management committees. And so there's a double layer of diligence that's being done. So your investment manager for your plan is diligencing the private equity investments, but the private equity fund itself tends to have an investment management committee. So there's actually probably more diligence being done around private equity investing than people, you know, initially the reaction is almost like, no, that's not right. Not for pension fund money. But in fact, there's more diligence that's being done than probably an ordinary, you know, investment.
Right. Yeah, so, okay, I mean, all of this, like, I love everything that I'm hearing. So I agree with you, Sanya. I really hope that we can get that change. You know, as an entrepreneur, you know, I have been in the trenches trying to, you know, just get liquidity or financing from our financial system. And it is tough. It is rough in these streets, right? So SMEs, small companies, we don't get the love. We genuinely don't get the love, right? And, you know, the truth of the matter is that we need, as a country, we need a lot more patient capital. So that's one of the beautiful things about the pension fund industry generally, is that the capital tends to be patient, right? And so, you know, one of the features for private equity or VC generally is that, you know, they raise funds, and then those funds may last, you know, 7 to 10 years, a 7 to 10 year fund. And so, you know, any investment they do now, you know, they know that, okay, they don't have to be stressing the company for significant improvements within a quarter or within a year. You know, they have some time to figure it out, you know, and, you know, you can't really develop as a private company. There's a lot of stuff that you need to like figure out, especially as a young company. When you're growing and you're growing quickly, you're figuring stuff out. Who is your customer? Who's your market? How do you get to market? How do you build up distribution? You know, all of this stuff, it takes time, and you're going to make mistakes, you know, and you can't do it under the scrutiny of the public markets and the public equity investors, where they're, you know, expecting quarterly results every quarter. So the private equity asset class is an extremely important asset class for the development of the economy and of the country generally, but specifically for smaller companies, you know, and for entrepreneurs. So I am very, you know, to me, like, this is one of those things where, yes, important to like, to work with DBJ and government, from a grant perspective, to provide grant funding into the financial system, through the DTIs and the financial institutions. That's important. That's one, lever, but it's a small lever. It's a small, portion of the pie. The real, another large lever is obviously the pension money, and not just pension. And it's also, I guess, the last thing that I want to ask about is these limitations and the regulations and everything we're talking about. Does it apply to other institutional investors? So like insurance companies, for example, or are they governed by something completely different, or is it, generally speaking, is it kind of like similar type of thing?
Right, good question. So the restrictions that I articulated earlier, those are just for pension funds. But insurance companies do have investment parameters. You're hearing me clearly?
Yeah, you blacked out a little bit. You said the parameters are specifically for
pension funds. But insurance companies have their regulatory framework. So there is an insurance regulations that dictate what they can invest in and to what degree. That's a little bit more liberal than pension funds. And then unit trusts, which is another kind of large pool of investable income. They also have a regulations under the Securities Act that dictate what they're able to invest in. But collective investment schemes, the unit trust mutual funds, they have greater latitude, even around foreign currency investing.
Can they invest in private equity and private debt too?
I believe so. I'd have to double check that honestly, but I don't think that restriction applies to them. Honestly, I don't think it does. I think that, and if it does, I think it's not as restrictive, but I'd have to double check that. But yeah, pension funds, and it's been a battle. And the truth is, when the legislation came into force, it was new to everybody, right? A regulated framework was new. And I think the FSC was getting its sea legs at the same time the industry was getting accustomed to this. And so in the first kind of the first 10 years, there was a let's just hold the reins really tightly because we need to make sure everybody's doing this properly. And we get it, right? Because we're talking about people's lifetime savings. You can't play with that.
Absolutely.
But I do believe that we're looking at 16 years on, 17 years on, that the pension funds, the trustees, the investment managers have by and large proven themselves to be prudent, to do the necessary diligence, to walk away from investments that don't look good. And you'll have a particular investment that 2 pension plans go in and 3 come out. So you're like, no. So I mean, it's not a kind of everybody's rushing in. People make determination as to whether this can work for my plan or not, or the plan that I'm managing. And I do think, Mark, that the industry has demonstrated the level of professional acumen and maturity, in investment maturity, to be able to move to a new level now in terms of the investment regulations. And many of the restrictions, I think we need to see that freed up. We lobbied for almost 15 years to get the changes that we got last year. And even those changes we felt were just too incremental. And we can't go another 15 years to get another kind of small movement. So the lobby effort has to kind of become more aggressive. And I do think the PIAJ and other industrial players, we need to move from being reactive to the government and being proactive. So we kind of react to the new limits rather than pushing even more to, for greater limits. So we do a bit of it, but we need to do more. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So this has been a great session, Sanya. Thank you for inviting me.
I could talk for hours on pensions, by the way, like retirement security.
I know. I know, me too. I mean, I'm not even in the industry, but the thing is, I understand the impact on the real economy and the rest of the country. And so, this stuff, I love this stuff. So, I mean, what I will say is, thank you first and foremost for championing this and being at the forefront and just pushing it, because it will definitely benefit everybody, all of Jamaica. And then I will definitely extend myself and say any help that you need, anything that you can count on me as a resource, because I truly understand the potential positive impact this can have, and it's very, very important, right? And in order for us to fully capitalize on what I call Jamaica's golden window, we have to have a lot more private money, pension money, being able to be invested in real assets, not just real estate, but actual companies and private companies and stuff. So I am making myself available to you and to the PIAJ and, you know, whatever. Anytime you need anything, just please give me a call, and, you know, and I'll do my best.
Mark, thank you so much. No, I appreciate that, and I'll take you up on it for sure.
Yeah, man, definitely. All right. Do you have anything you wanted to ask me, or are we good to go?
No, I mean, I'm really happy for the support that you just pledged. And I think we just need to ensure that we keep the dialogue going. We keep the dialogue going in terms of socializing the different issues and getting people to understand the importance of it. It's not something that, you know, you can wait till you're 40 or 60. I mean, to think about it. You need to start thinking about retirement security now. Reality is that old age poverty is a real thing, you know. So I'm just so glad that you get it and that you're excited about it, because it's not often I meet somebody who is so excited about, you know, nation building in this way. So that's good.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. And again, another thing that you can think about too, it just came to me a while ago when you said, you know, people are 40 or 60, is what, given that we are so far behind, you know, in terms of the total population, you know, 16% or 20% in a very generous way, you know, have contributed. Maybe there's some sort of like catch-up mechanism for those that, you know, have missed out. So, you know, instead of, you know, be only doing, you know, 5% of your income, or, you know, 10% or whatever, and maybe you can do like a lump sum or whatever, you know, and then, you know, you accrue those tax benefits, and then going forward, you know what I mean? So just kind of like, you know, coming up with all these like creative solutions to kind of, you know, really help us get to where we need to get to.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Yes, agreed. All right, Mark, thank you.
All right, no problem. Thank you for having me, Sanya. We'll talk.
All right, take care. Bye.
All right, bye.